Shalom. So we're going to keep counting down to Passover. We're on day 4, and so we're dealing with the 4th plague, the plague of swarms. There's some different thoughts on what the swarms were. We tend to translate it as flies, but it's really just swarms. And have you ever bought one of these little sets from online and thought, wait a minute, why is this the 4th plague? Well, I did. And I did some research and I found that in the Hebrew it's just swarms, and so there's some dispute on whether the swarms are flies or whether they were wild animal swarms, as you might imagine. So why don't we talk about both those? So if it was flies, the scholars believe that this is against, oh boy, I don't know, it's hard to know if the CH is supposed to be a ch, like in English, or ch, like in Hebrew. That was a fly god, and he was supposed to be like a god of protection for Pharaoh, and then later it became a god of protection for all of Egypt, which is so interesting because in the case of the flies bothered the Egyptians, but not the Hebrews. So you could see that the Father's protection was on the Hebrews in this case. Messiah's presence alone and his ministry and his atonement, it was a demonstration of the eternal protection that Yah has brought to all of his children, and we are so grateful for that. I think of also in Isaiah, for a future prophecy, it says that Yah will be like a small shelter or a protection for us or for the 10 tribes when they are scattered abroad on the earth. And so that is something that we have to look forward to. And I hold on to Psalm 91 for that protection should things from the book of Revelation, start happening real quick. Or more so, depending on what you believe. But if the swarms are wild animals, I think that if you look at the Egyptian gods, the pantheon of gods, you'd see that there are many of them, some of the more famous ones that have characteristics actually of wild animals, like a jackal, an eagle, or falcon, things like that. They have like physical characteristics to represent these false Elohim, these false gods. So there must have been certainly some superstition around the depictions of these false Elohim that caused them to use those character traits in their depictions. So they probably believed that the gods had some relationship with these animals. They probably even had some superstitions about it, like if they saw these animals, that it was a representation. So, that being said, if these swarms were swarms of animals that were devouring the Egyptians, then they would have no other understanding but that either the gods had no control over these animals, or that the gods were allowing these animals to harass the Egyptians but not the Hebrews. That must have been very shocking for them. Now, in Messiah's life, we're not really told of any interactions with him and animals so much, but I think about the fact that he demonstrated control of the fish when Peter, James, and John got that big haul where they put their net in and they had so much that the boats were going down and they had to call to each other. And I have often wondered about the donkey that Messiah rode. And of course, as a child, they always showed the depictions of Messiah being born in a stable with animals. But Messiah himself, just much like the false gods of Egypt, has been depicted as a lion and as a lamb. And it's interesting because a lion is one of those wild animals, and in laying down his life, he kind of undoes the plague if the plague was swarms of animals, because he's, again, bringing that eternal protection, and instead of devouring the flock, he is laying down his life for them. We know that in Revelation there's a judgment or a plague where a third of the beasts, I believe, or wild beasts, are allowed to devour mankind. And so you can see that that plague is coming back. It's been said that also that flies were a very practical representation of the sacrifices. If you've ever butchered an animal outdoors, you know that flies, well, if you deal with animals outdoors, you know that flies are attracted to animals and the dung around the animals and all of those sorts of things. So if you are actually butchering an animal, the flies will come and be a part of the entrails and all of those sorts of things. So I could definitely see why, if it were flies, that it would be a very real representation to the Egyptian people of the sacrifice system and all of the sacrifices that they had made to these false gods and how they were not being protected even though they had made all of these sacrifices. And I am thankful that in this season we know that the ultimate sacrifice has been made and that will give us that eternal protection that we all desire. So I hope that you are blessed as you look forward to Passover. Shalom.